Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we will be reviewing two films from the 1960s. We'll be looking at A Taste of Honey, one of Tony Richardson's kitchen sink movies out of Britain. But first, we're going to be looking at Bunny Lake is Missing, a thriller mystery directed by Otto Preminger. Single mother, American mother, Anne Lake, played by Carol Lynley, arrives in London with her daughter, nicknamed Bunny, to live with her brother, Stephen, who is played by Keir Dalia. Anne leaves Bunny at a nursery school, but when she returns, there is no sign of her daughter and no evidence that she was ever there. Stephen, a journalist, questions all who might have seen Bunny. Once Scotland Yard Superintendent Newhouse Laurence Olivier joins in the search, he unearths several disturbing details about Anne. This was one of Otto Preminger's later films, coming out in 1965. So we'll talk a little bit about him in a minute. But first, Ariana, what did you think of Bunny Lake is Missing in general?
Strong first half, weak second half. That's mostly how I felt about it. I just wish that it was written a little bit more tightly, because once we get to that second half, you're just kind of like, huh? What just happened?
I don't think I dislike the second half as much as you. I think there's some great moments in that second half.
Yes.
I do feel that the movie wasn't able to keep the suspense building. There was kind of a deflationary period.
Mm-hmm.
And then near the end, it kind of ramps back up and is satisfying, I think, the ending.
Yeah.
But there's kind of parts in the second act just kind of sag.
Yeah, it sags a little bit, and then it's just sort of like, because of the revelations of what's happening, the performances feel a little frail.
Well, I would say that Keir Dalia and Carol Lynley are not they're okay actors.
Yeah.
We'll talk a bit about who were the strong actors in there. There's one actor in there that was like, he was good. He was very good. He was good. So Otto Preminger, anybody kind of familiar with film probably knows Otto Preminger. He is both a story director. He has done a lot of acting as well in, I believe it was Stalag 19, the Billy Wilder movie about the prisoner of war camp during World War II. You've seen it.
Yeah.
I think Otto Preminger played one of the Nazis in it. Preminger was an Austrian who was born in Ukraine, interestingly enough. And when this movie came out, we're kind of reaching the end of his peak as a director. The late 60s and 70s are going to not be very kind to Mr. Preminger. And by 1979, he will be directing his last film, and it's a critical and box office bomb. Before this, he had done a variety of different movies, and especially in the 50s and the early 60s, a lot of his work was attempting to challenge taboos. And you've seen another one of his films, Advise and Consent, about Peter Fonda, who is having to attend the hearings to become Secretary of State. And it's about the workings of Congress, and Charles Laughton has a really good role in it, that sort of heavy-set actor.
Yes.
And so in that film, they address homosexuality in a way that for the early 60s in America is very shocking. You don't expect to see it. And so he also did Anatomy of a Murder, which we need to watch at some point. And that movie really pushed boundaries because part of the crime is a sex crime. And I think it was one of the first American movies to use the words sperm and semen and rape on film. And its thing was, we need to present the way what happens in a courtroom, right? While still making it an entertaining movie. So he had kind of gained this reputation by the time Bunny Lake is made of, he'd been this director who really challenged a lot of taboos, but his work was often kind of inconsistent. He'd have really great movies, and then he'd have movies that people just couldn't figure out why he made it. The years that follow Bunny Lake, he does have an interesting divergence in his career, which is that he ends up playing Mr. Freeze on the Batman TV series. And fun fact, he was one of 3 actors who played Mr. Freeze on that show. And the other 2 are actors you're familiar with. He was preceded by George Sanders, who played the critic in All About Eve and was also the voice of Captain Hook and Shere Khan.
I mean, good for
And
him.
then after Preminger played Mr. Freeze, they brought in Eli Wallach to play Mr. Freeze, who was in all 3 of Sergio Leone's Fistful movies. Or he wasn't in the first one. He was the older bounty hunter in For a Few Dollars More, the second one. And then he was the villain in the third one, that guy with the mustache.
Yeah.
So Mr. Freeze played by like very well-known character actors. But back to this movie. So Bunny Lake is based on a novel
Okay, that makes sense.
set in New York City.
Oh, okay.
Otto Preminger hated working in New York, and he always preferred working in London more. So he told the studio, "I'll make it, but we have to make it in London." And they went, "Fine." Also, the woman who wrote it, it just didn't necessarily have like a magnificent writing career, but she had a very like steady writing career, and her work seemed to be centered around mysteries, often domestic type of mysteries, which we can kind of see here. The novel, which I have not read, but from what I have read about the novel, it sounds like it had more of an ambiguous ending about what was happening. And he hated that and said they needed to rewrite it and we need to have a definitive, concrete ending to this movie.
Okay.
And so that's how we ended up with the ending that we get. I do think that moving it to London was a good idea because it makes her a fish out of water.
Yeah.
And it adds to the isolation she feels dealing with this problem. It's not, they do speak her language, but it is a different culture and it is a different city. And she's taking her daughter to a place that, you know, she's never been to before. She doesn't know the way the rules work here.
Yeah.
And that's to be noted, we do not see Bunny. We just see Anne and she's talking to a cook at the it's kind of like a day school, kindergarten, preschool kind of thing. And she just says that Bunny is in the first day room. Yeah. And so the film hinges on that, is Bunny even real question. What do you think of the way gaslighting is handled in this movie?
Oh boy. So it is this interesting thing that like, so once the Scotland Yard, is that what they like comes in, he starts to question, is Bunny Lake real? So it's because of the thing having to do is like they'd arrived from New York and she had explained that she had kept her daughter mostly inside due to the fact that she had a cold. So nobody beyond her brother or her had seen Bunny except a few times that they're like on the bus.
I do want to note how the film does not make it very clear that they're brother and sister at the beginning.
No.
And I don't know if that's intentional because of some of the weird shit that happens later. That I don't know if Preminger wanted us to assume they're brother and sister that they were lovers, to then find out they're brother and sister, because our reaction when he goes, "Your brother," was both like, "What?
Yeah.
That's our brother?"
Like once like it was declared that they were brother and sister, the casting was fantastic because they do resemble one another. They kind of like have the same shape of face, high cheekbones, like hair coloring, but it's also because you never really think about like an American woman taking over the affairs of her brother's house. You mostly associated that like in the old ways of England, right? When you watch like an old movie where the guy marries and it turns out his sister has been taking care of the house.
She's like an old maid or something.
Yes.
So like her job is just I do think it's interesting that both films we watched have to do with women who have illegitimate children. So they are children out of wedlock.
Yes.
Right. And that for the 1960s, that does seem like a rather taboo thing to center.
What I did like is the fact that she brings up the fact that she like her daughter is out of wedlock and asks the Scotland Yard like, will that be a problem when you go search for her? And he reassures her like, that's not going to be an issue. I was just asking where her father was because she is missing.
Well, they're looking for like suspects.
Yes. And then, like, when you start to watch the movie even further, it's more the gaslighting you start to realize is further provoked by her brother.
We don't want to spoil anything.
Yeah, it is.
But there's just so much doubt is put on her
Yes.
that we're watching it and doubting her. Like anybody watching
Yeah.
this movie go, this woman's crazy.
Well, it's also like they ask her, "Hey, do you have a snap of her?" And she's like, "Snap? What do you mean?" And they meant like a photograph of her.
Snapchat or something like that.
Yeah, Snapchat. That's what they used to
Yeah.
call it back in the old English days.
But yeah, and it's
like, oh no, all our photographs are with the moving stuff. We haven't received them yet.
and when they go to the house,
Because she remembers that she has a passport.
well, because when they go to the house, the child's belongings are not there.
Yeah.
And we see her lay these children's clothing out and everything, but then they're gone.
Yeah.
So part of what you go through in this movie is going, were we seeing like a hallucination from this lady's point of view? Like, what's going on here?
It's like this weird thing that her landlord, while she's like starting to put this stuff up, is kind of following her around the apartment. So you start to wonder if the landlord is a figment of her imagination that's just like bothering her and pushing her out of the apartment.
Let's talk about Wilson, the landlord.
Yeah.
My favorite character in this movie, Noel Coward, who is it's a name I had heard, and I think he's very well known as a playwright of works that came out like in the 20s and 30s. Very openly and obviously queer.
Yeah.
Like this man is not trying to hide it at all. And I think the movie's all the better for it because his personality in this movie, he has maybe what, like 3 scenes in the movie?
Yes.
He visits her, he shows back up at the apartment, and then they go to his apartment to question him.
But like he's so abrasive. Like
yeah, you immediately dislike him.
Yeah, because like the one point, like he is like hitting on her, and the thing is, like, yes,
is he though? Like I don't know.
It's like he is hitting.
He's provoking her.
He's hitting on her, but it's like it's not in a like, oh, it's sort of like, how can I break you down? Kind of it was like situation, because he's suddenly bothered because he's like, well, nobody told me there was a child moving in.
And there's another thing where you're like, so is the kid real?
Yeah.
Now I know what's going on with that.
Yeah.
We're not gonna say it.
No.
Now I know why that's going on. But at the time, you're like, so is Bunny real? Because you have not seen Bunny at any point in this movie. You just keep hearing Anne talk about her. But what makes that even more confounding is that Stephen, her brother, will also talk about Bunny. And then there's the little story that gets shared.
Yeah.
Where Stephen is talking to Ada, who is one of the co-founders of the children's school where Bunny has gone missing. She is retired, but lives in an apartment at the very top of the building.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of stumble across her as they're searching for Bunny. And I that was another character I really liked, Ada Ford, who she's now devoting her retirement years to the study of children's dreams and nightmares, and is listening to audio recordings of children talking about their dreams and nightmares, and she's going to write a book about it.
Yeah.
And she is this very like witchy, strange kind of character who immediately you get suspect of her. You're like, and pretty quickly after that, you realize she's not really a threat. She's just more of the color of this film.
Yeah.
Like kind of giving it personality. And Stephen tells her that when Anne was a little girl, she had an imaginary friend named Bunny.
That was a little girl.
That was a little girl too. And eventually this gets to the superintendent, Laurence Olivier's character. And that's just even more in the pile of, I think we might be dealing with a mentally ill woman kind of thing. So the scenes that take place in the children's school, I was surprised how much of the film took place there.
Yeah.
What did you think of those scenes and those actors?
I
in that
think
place?
like the actors were just fine. I wish that there was a little bit. I don't know if I wanted to know the characters more or not. Like there are like characters that's like one of the leads that's like the person in charge. She's like, do not call the police. Do not, like, we'll find your kid. We'll find your kid. And then I love is like once they go like meet Ada and like, hey, kid's been missing, and she's like, kid's been gone missing before. It's happened. Like she doesn't like she's kind of like that, you know, and she's like, a lot of times it's like it's close families that end up hurting these children, but that's life. And it's this interesting thing that like Anne is kind of like cannot deal with having to hear that. Meantime, Steven's like, that doesn't
That just happened.
happen. But he's only like Steven is only like really like indignant when he realizes like his sister is like in a high panic stage. I do love like also going back to the revelation that they're siblings. It's when Anne is crying because she's like, I don't know where she is. She could be hurt. I shouldn't have left her side. And he's holding her head like just cradled very close.
When they call each other like darling and dear. And
Yeah.
that's why I'm like, I think the incestuousness was meant to be
Yeah,
implied.
until like you're just like, what? Like when it's just like, oh, your brother. You're just like, huh?
Who? No, that's her husband, sir. What are you talking about?
Like especially because like before she realizes Bunny is late, he calls her at the apartment and he's like, is everything settled? Like da da da. Like she's like, oh, come home for dinner. I'm making fried chicken especially for you. Like this demand that it's almost like it's
It
like
sounds like a husband wife thing.
yeah, and it's just like this awkwardness, like because then you start to notice that like even though Steven is saying that like he would ruin the Scotland Yard if they don't take this seriously because he's a journalist, he's like, wait till I go to the office. We never see him go back to the office to make the demands. Like
I mean, it does take place like over the course of 24 hours. So.
yeah, but we never like see him like making calls to just be like like, and there's like no affection coming out of him of like when talking about Bunny. He's just kind of like
He's more upset about Anne being upset.
yes. And then like when he's looking at the photos, there's something weird that happens because Scotland Yard is like, wait, what's that photo? And he's like, that's just my sister when she was younger. And like immediately pulls the photo away. But it's like the question is of like, was it her as a child or was it more of a provocative younger photo of her when she was a teenager?
Yeah, there was like there is weird shit going on between these two people that is like I wonder like in the book how much is implied or if that was something Preminger added to make the film more provocative. I feel like the second act sags a bit.
Yeah.
Once the sort of inciting incident and the mystery is established, the investigation begins. It's interesting at first, and then it kind of loses steam, and the movie just kind of feels redundant for a while. Like we keep having the same things told to us over and over again.
Yeah.
We're not getting new information necessarily.
And the new information that we do get is almost kind of like jarring that you don't know what to do with it. And then it's just sort of like then it almost comes a little too quick. And you're just like everything's a little too convenient.
When I was reading about the locations that they chose, and that was something that Preminger really he wanted to make sure they got really good locations. And I think that's one of the film's strengths.
Yeah.
Like the school is a great set.
Yeah.
Like the way it's so there's so many floors to it and like so many little nooks and crannies. I loved the apartment that they have. And apparently, I believe that was on Frogmore Lane, I think is the name of it, which is where I can't think of her name, but Daphne du Maurier, maybe? No, I don't think it was. But it was a gothic horror writer. I think that's where her childhood home was or something.
Okay, I don't know.
And then the doll repair shop.
The doll repair shop. Oh,
that was a doll museum.
Yeah,
I
that
found
was
out.
Great.
It is one of the most horrific locations I've seen in a movie in a while. Because at one point she's going there because she goes, hey, I've dropped off Bunny's doll. That's proof that she exists. And the doll maker, who's this great, like one scene, probably like an old theater actor kind of a thing, tells her that he's in a wheelchair and he says he can't go with her. But if she goes down to the basement, that's where the doll will be. And you're immediately like, the basement of a doll repair store sounds horrible. And it looks as awful as you might imagine. The lighting is, I mean, the lighting throughout the whole film is great.
Yeah, the lighting is amazing.
But like that scene, because she's only going down by like an oil lamp, it has like the look you would want. Like I'm sure Guillermo del Toro like loves this movie. It feels like something in his wheelhouse. And especially a scene like that where, Anne is surrounded by all these dolls that are peering out at her. Then there's a moment that happens at the doll shop. I will not say a single detail of what it is. It was the what the fuck moment of the movie.
It was a great scene.
Because I did not expect that at all.
It was, then there is like this close up into the eyes, and it was very good. But it's also just like, it's kind of, it is the shift that goes through into the movie.
It's the thing that had to happen at some point.
Yeah, but I felt like that was a little bit too much.
I liked it.
I mean,
it did. I think it pushed the movie into kind of almost a camp territory. Like,
yes.
Now we're getting a little ridiculous, but it was so good. It was such a great moment where it's like the train goes off the tracks. Things we thought we understood are just completely destroyed. And now you're in a space in the movie where you're like, I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
I don't know what the truth is anymore. I thought I had figured this out, but now I don't know. And then the movie just like, it uses that as momentum to get to the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Without saying how the movie ends, did you feel satisfied by the ending of this movie?
Not really.
It just kind of felt like it had to end.
Yeah.
And it was one of those like, I don't need a wrap up. I don't need like an epilogue or anything. But it did feel like it was just, well, that's solved, the end. And then we just see the end come up on the screen and it's over.
Yeah, and it's just like, hold up, we just established that this is a fish out of water scenario. She doesn't know anybody. This is it. Like, what happens to her life now? Because it's not as, yeah, it's a little all over the place.
Another thing I thought, and it was when we were watching the movie, once again, this is what a movie nerd I am. I said, wow, that looks like a Saul Bass intro, right?
Yes.
It's Saul Bass did it. But I mean, I don't think I should be very proud of myself because he has such a distinctive style. Like, if for anybody who's not sure who Saul Bass is, he was a graphic designer who became very well known for movie intros in the 1960s in particular. And if you look at something like Vertigo, I believe he did the opening to that, and that's like one of his most iconic openings.
Which you can see like the similarities there because it's kind of cut out.
This was far more simple.
Yes.
It was just pages being torn.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't super elaborate. The effect was pretty cool for the time.
Yeah.
Because it was a mix of like, I guess, green or blue screen and then paper or something. The one part of the movie that I thought was very odd and had nothing to do with the plot, and I don't know if you remember what it was, there was something that kept popping up throughout the movie, and I'm just like, why is this here?
Okay.
The zombies? The 1960s
Oh,
pop
yeah,
band, The
Like,
Zombies.
it was like the music that was playing, like they were basically the whole soundtrack.
Not the whole soundtrack. It was just like for a couple scenes, like when they're at a pub, all of a sudden the camera will just focus on the TV for like 30 seconds of this like zombies performance. And it does nothing to do with the movie.
Like towards the middle of the movie, while we're watching Anne like leave a building, they start playing again.
Yeah. But there's like maybe 2 or 3 instances of their music. And I read that it was part of a trend in the 60s, mid 60s, of just doing blatant promotions for musical artists that recorded for sister companies of movie studios, so like Warner Music and Warner Films.
I can understand, but it's also very weird because like the Zombies
it doesn't
band
fit the tone.
does not. I don't know.
I mean, I like the Zombies.
I wonder if it's sort of like, if you really love the band Zombies, you're gonna really love this film.
Yeah, I just don't know, like the music that the Zombies did. I don't understand how that made their audience a crossover audience with this or vice versa. I mean, I'm sure there were people that like both, but it's not enough that I would invest money in like making sure we had scenes promoting their music in it. But Preminger, he was like kind of with it, as they would say back then. But to the point of like kind of embarrassment, kind of like fellow kids. Because he did make a movie which I have not seen called Skidoo, that was one of I think Groucho Marx's final performances, and is a movie about, I think, someone dropping acid.
Oh, like a psychedelic,
but it's like
kind of comedy,
like kind of a farcical, spoofy kind of thing that they say is everything I've ever read about it. It's just like every joke falls flat. It doesn't. It's a bunch of old people in a movie about like hippie culture. Might be worth watching at some point. But yeah, the zombies was, and they were listed in the credits too, along with all the actors.
Yeah,
They don't go like music by the zombies, it's starring the zombies.
Yeah, it's not as if like by accident she's like walking by the building where they're coming out of like a set or something. It's just they're just there on the radio and then on the television.
I also found out an instance where we successfully dodged a bullet.
Okay.
There was going to be a remake of this movie set for 2007. Uh, the actress is.
Why are you turning your
I don't want you to glimpse and peek at my iPad and see. The actress, her is someone that is from the South.
Okay.
Was big in her career kind of took off in the late 90s. Definitely in the early 2000s. Now she kind of is in a mom role. She was on a very big HBO series.
Witherspoon?
Yes, as Anne.
Okay.
And that was where I was like, I mean, I don't think Reese Witherspoon is terrible. The director, though, I was like, oh no. Joe Carnahan. I don't know how many of his films you've seen, but I know at least one of his films you've seen.
Okay.
The A-Team.
Oh no.
Yeah, it fell through and it did not get made.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah, but I thought that is an awful director for this movie. I just don't. His style and this story just feel like a major clash, and you would get something very. It feels like one of those movies that came out in the 2000s that's just utterly forgettable.
Yeah.
Like the concept of it. Would you recommend people seek out Bunny Lake is Missing?
I'm on the urge of saying no.
I would say yes for one particular reason.
Okay, what's that?
This is a kind of movie that we don't get anymore, and it's a good reminder of taking an established director who's well known and pairing them with material that might be considered mid-budget.
Yeah.
And they produce something that is very entertaining, that like you are going to get your money's worth when you go to the theater to see it. You're going to get an interesting story. You're going to have very beautiful visuals. You're going to have something that surprises you.
Yeah.
That it genuinely, you cannot really predict where this story is going to go. It is meant to creep you out, and it's creepy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those where it's like, it's not a movie that's going to win major awards, but it's a movie that is kind of the reason why movies were made in the first place, was to entertain people, give you something like a fun, thrilling story that's very well made and doesn't talk down to the audience. It never acts as though the audience are idiots in this movie.
Yeah.
British teen Jo, played by Rita Tushingham, struggles to find love in her bleak day-to-day life, which is dominated by her alcoholic mother, Helen. When Jo has a brief fling with a black sailor, and Helen takes up with a new lover, their already tense relationship is further strained. Jo faces more complications as she discovers she is pregnant, but finds support when she moves in with an odd but thoughtful gay student named Jeffrey. This is Tony Richardson's A Taste of Honey.
Jeffrey or Joffrey?
Jeffrey. I don't know. I'm going to say Jeffrey. So Ariana, what did you think generally of A Taste of Honey?
It's a good movie, but I rated it like 3.5. It's a movie that if it were to be remade now without barely any changes, and also just being like, oh, it's still making it within the same kind of like timeline. I don't think it would do well with modern audiences completely, just because there's so little information about like one of the characters.
Jeffrey, right?
Yes.
Yeah. The gay character does feel very on the side.
Yes.
We don't get to know him as a person in depth.
Nope.
I think it was pretty good.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm going to give some background here. So it was based on a stage play, A Taste of Honey, which was written by Sheila Delaney. It is the most performed post-World War II play by a British woman we have.
Okay.
She was 19 years old when she wrote this play, and it is based in her hometown of Salford, which I believe is Birmingham, I think, or was it Manchester? They had a very, I think it was Manchester.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Once again, my English geography is not that great, other than I know that London is in the south of England. I know that, and I know Scotland's in the north. So it is very, and they filmed it on location.
Yeah.
So it's very much inspired by, I think, things she saw and encountered. She was working class, but was a very intelligent young woman as a student. So probably very observant and aware and looking at the lives of people in her community. One of the things that she noted was she would go to see stage plays uh, where um, she would notice that homosexual characters were not treated in a way she felt they deserved to be.
Okay.
She thought that they deserved more dignity. I think often if it was a comedy, a queer character was a joke, right? Because of their, foppishness.
Yeah.
And that they were always, they weren't part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And so when she wrote this play, I think she wanted to make sure that there was a homosexual character that was a part of the story. And I wouldn't be surprised, probably based on friends that she had herself.
Yeah.
Then we move to the director, Tony Richardson, who this film is coming out right in the middle of like his hot streak of movies. He was a big part of what's considered the British New Wave that started in the 50s and ran into the 1960s. And this play, or this, both the play and this film are part of a genre called kitchen sink dramas, which were working class, working poor stories. Hence, kitchen sink. They were stories of people in their kitchen
Yeah.
dealing with everyday problems. And so he became very famous for making those types. There was also the angry young man trope that was a big part of the British movies. And he was also a contributor to those as well. And so this movie kind of hits both. And it came out, I believe, a year before his other kitchen sink drama, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, which I have seen and is also an angry young man movie.
Yeah.
And incredibly good. I think what's so unique about this movie is when you look at all of this British New Wave cinema that was coming out, these working class stories, very rarely was the story being told from the point of view of a woman.
Yeah.
And so this makes it such a unique thing to have what was, a female perspective on what was happening in England at this time, and especially life lived among the working class. I have to imagine so much of this movie like blew people's minds when they went and saw this in the theater, because she has a sexual relationship with a black man.
Mm-hmm.
And then her roommate ends up being a gay man who is willing to help her raise her baby.
Yes.
What did you think of the main actress, Rita Tushingham? This was apparently her debut film. And she went on to have, it looks like a very long career in cinema. I think she's still working in the UK. What did you think of her?
I think she was like pretty decent. I did like the fact that this isn't entirely a likable character at times. I did enjoy the fact that there is a conflict between her and her mother, and it is at times you're just kind of like, you're terrible to your mom. Like you're really like horribly mean to her. But then the same could be said about the way that her mother kind of like neglects her or just puts her in these weird situations. Like, the first scene is like she's at school looking at herself in the mirror, and one of her classmates is like, "Hey, there's gonna be a party tonight. Are you gonna come?" And she's like, "I can't go." And she's like, "You never go out with us anywhere." And she's like, "Well, first of all, I don't have any clothes to go out." So it's not a scene where she's being picked on or she's being bullied. Like she is liked at school.
Yeah.
She's kind of considered one of the funny girls at school. But it is just supposed to be like she doesn't have any money to go out. Her mother doesn't spend money, and then she's like, "Well, we might have to move." And then like when her friends is like makes a remark, that's when you could feel like, oh, they know that I'm lower class than them. And it is like her having to then gather all her stuff and move with her mom while like the landlady's not paying attention to them. finding another apartment to live in that's ways away from her school now, being in a new place again, but it's something that she's often used to where she can't make any forms of attachments, and the only other person that's there is her mother, and they don't get along all the time.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to have a very unlikable girl as your central character, because so often we've become used to like male characters being unlikable, but a female character that's unlikable, that's considered like, oh, you don't want to do that, right?
Yeah, it's also a harder pill to swallow because a lot of times what is easier is to have someone who is very quiet and submissive to be the likable character, to understand why it is that she suddenly becomes lovable. But it's this interesting story where, like, yes, she has this relationship with this black sailor. In the meantime, she's having this relationship. She's being very realistic about it. She's like, I'm probably never going to see you again. And because she's sort of like, I'm never going to see you again, she kind of throws herself into the relationship by having sex with him when she shouldn't probably be having sex with him. But it's also like the only bits of like intimacy that she has with anyone else. The only time that we see her like smile and be joyful, but it's because she's receiving that attention that she's lacking from her mother, and the attention that she maybe could have gotten from her friend group if she was allowed to go outside.
Well, and she does, I wouldn't even say she has a friend group because they move around so much. That's one of the reasons.
Yeah, it's
She
like,
can't, she meets people, she spends a few months maybe around them, and then she disappears and they never know
yeah, and
whatever
it's
happened to
also
Joe.
like the
Yeah.
thing is like she doesn't have like, money for dresses, so she can't go out with her school friends. And then like when they move into the new apartments, it's just like a ton of kids that are way younger than her. And she is like ready to be done with school because it's sort of like she probably knows that she doesn't get the best grades and the teachers don't have a high regard towards her, even though she shows a little bit of like talent towards drawing. And her mother's like, have you thought about going to college? Like that moment that the mom is showing concern, but she's like already at an age that's a little bit too late to be giving her that kind of affection, that she combats with her mother at times because it's like she wants her mother to pay attention to her, but she combats with her because, again, she's a teenager and she doesn't know. It's like this, the combative nature from her is like, I don't know how long this love and praise is gonna last, so fuck you, I don't want it.
Well, it's also Joe's reached this age. She's supposed to be 15 in the play. And I did read in the play that it says she tells the sailor she's 18. I
Yeah.
don't remember her saying that in the
They don't really
movie.
discuss, but they say in the movie she's gonna be done of school within a few
So maybe
days.
they make her older in the
Yeah.
movie. But she has reached this age where I think her mother no longer sees her as a little girl that needs me to take care of her anymore. But she neglects the fact that she's never really given her daughter any guidance in life.
Yeah.
And there comes this point where she just basically abandons her daughter
Yeah.
because Peter has come along and he's bought a house and he wants Helen to come live with him. But the catch is he doesn't want Joe anywhere near him. He despises this girl. But let's talk a little bit about Peter, played by Robert Stevens. I thought that was a great performance in the movie.
Yeah.
He was so unlikable, but never cartoonish.
Yeah, like when he was like with the mom and he's flirting with her, you can understand why she has this like she adores him,
And he's a few
right?
years younger than her, which I think is one of the
Yeah,
appeals is, oh, it's a younger man who wants me. That's
yeah.
rare.
Yeah, it's supposed to be, I think she's supposed to be like 40 and he's supposed to be 8 years younger than her.
Uh, and the scenes where they go to the beach together or the boardwalk, right?
Yeah.
Uh, what did you think of those interactions between Peter and Joe during those scenes?
It was interesting because it's like Joe is kind of like asking him like, "Oh, do you think I'm pretty? Do you?" And it's like this thing of like you don't know if like is she trying to steal him away or is he just trying because like he whistles at some girls passing by
Yeah.
and he's just kind of like, "Get the fuck away from me."
Well, it's I almost feel like she's trying to like ruin the relationship, get him to do something so she can tell her mom and then it's over.
Yeah.
Uh, and I mean, in this type of situation, I wouldn't be surprised if her mother's had previous boyfriends that have made passes at her daughter, right? When
Yeah.
mom wasn't around. Uh, I feel like Robert Stevens plays Peter as like just the perfect. I'm trying to think of the like word like twit. Just like
Yeah.
he reminded me of those kind of Monty Python characters where they would make fun of kind of they weren't rich but like suburban British people.
Yeah, kind of like that Alan Partridge, like
Yeah, yeah, oh
persona, like
yeah.
that. It
Very
feels,
full of himself, but an
yeah,
idiot at the same
but
time.
also kind of like he knows his limits because like you could see the insecurities like really seep in when Joe's like, that glass eye of yours, can you take it out? Like when they're like in the apartment, and you could just be like, you could tell like he's embarrassed that she's noticed the glass eye, and he's just like, shut up, don't talk to me, kind of thing. And um it's it's like why he probably prefer like went with the mom, because it's just like someone of his age might be asking him about the eye, and she's just gonna be a little bit more submissive.
Well, that also points to he can't get someone younger because of his disability, but
Yeah.
someone
Or because of his arrogance
yeah,
also.
and he sees Helen as desperate, and that's one of the appeals
Yeah.
is she's willing to make sacrifices to be with me,
Hmm.
and I like that. Um, I read a quote from the writer Sheila Delaney where she said that one of the things she wanted to infuse into this film was that a lot of people looked at places like Salford and thought the people there were gormless, which was a word I had to look up.
What is
Very British slang.
homeless?
Lacking self-awareness, I think.
Okay.
So sort of like it's a way of gormless, I feel like is a term you might refer to a group of people that are often in an underclass, and as a way to almost say they're almost like slightly more intelligent than apes, right? Like they don't have an awareness, they don't have an inner life.
Yeah.
And so she said that to her, she said the people in Salford were full of life and cynical, was how she pointed it out.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so interesting, her use of the word cynical as a word to combat a pejorative, because we typically don't think of cynical as a positive trait, but you can't be cynical without being self-aware, right?
That makes perfect sense, because the idea that you would think that these people were like so below and like unaware of themselves, but it's like all of them felt like, yeah, we come from like poverty, and there's no way to get out of it. There's no way to properly get out of it unless like you get married to someone who has more money than you go to university, but you don't even know if you have the money to go or the grades to go, or
Or you
it's
have the
just
background knowledge
the
to complete the
background
degree.
to complete the degree, or it's just sort of like you just accept it for what it is. And especially in the scenes where it's her and like Joffrey like going around and being like, can you smell the canals?
Are you talking about Joe and Joffrey? Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and it's just like like how like it's all dirty, it's gross, like the children are dirty, and he's like, well, the children can't help to get themselves dirty in this area. And how him as a character is more accepting about his surroundings, while she is like lamenting it and like is horrified.
Yeah, I think the dynamic between those characters, and I do feel that Jeffrey, I wanted more from that character,
Yeah.
but I do think that's a really good insight you point out there is he is more in tune with the community because clearly he's grown up here. And Joe kind of bounces around to places like this, so they've all come to look the same and feel the same to her, which is just grimy, dirty dead ends.
Yeah.
And she can't see life here. And for him as a queer man in the early 60s in the UK, the future that he's looking out onto does not look very bright. It looks very limited. He's getting a degree in textiles, so we're thinking that he's probably going to go into fashion to some degree. And he has an interest in making baby clothes for her. But he seems very passionate about the idea of being a caretaker for her and her baby, but
Yeah.
not in like a nuclear family husband sense.
I mean, like, no, they have a moment that he like asked to kiss her because he's like, I've never kissed a girl. I want to know how it feels like. Because I think it's this understanding that he realizes he loves her and wants to raise this child with her, but there is no physical attraction between them.
And all they've ever seen are a man and a woman and a baby.
Yeah.
And the man and the woman are in some kind of a relationship, whether married or living out of wedlock. but it's clear that like there's a sexual thing between the two of them.
I mean, what I do like when we're talking about the cynical stuff is when he goes looking for her because he's like, I've made dinner. Like, where is she? Because they've been living together for a bit, and she's walked like off to watch the ships because she's realized that she's pregnant. And he's like telling her there are ways to get rid of the child, and she's like, no, I can't do it, that would be horrible. He's like, all right, then when is the child due? She's like, November. And he's like, all right, so let's start. And she's like, why would I start hoping? She's like, if I start hoping, then that's when the child will come out and he would disabled or something. Like, she's like rattling all the reasons why she should not be hopeful for this child, despite the fact that she's like, I don't want to have an abortion. I don't want to eliminate like the
Because she still loves that sailor,
yeah.
but that sailor's gone and he's probably never coming back based on like the way
Yeah,
his
even
life
though
is.
like he gave her a ring, like we don't know when he's gonna come back to that port. Like we don't like, and it is despite the fact that she's taken into the option of keeping it, she's still like, I cannot hold hope because when you hold hope, things are taken away from you.
Yeah. And I think that's something that is ever present in any poor communities, especially in the West that I've encountered, is life forces you to abandon hope that it will get better. And you teach yourself to just become satisfied with the decline of the present.
Yes.
And that's something where I think that Jeffrey is pushing back against that.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that his options are limited as a gay man, but he has figured out a plan in which he could kind of subvert what society says he can and can't do. And that's by developing this friendship with Joe and being there for the baby.
Yeah.
I think the film, they've also said it's a good example of gallows humor, especially from Joe. Gallows humor being grim irony in a desperate situation. So the kind of jokes that she makes at her mother, she's never teasing her mother playfully. She's reminding her mother of the awful circumstances that they're in.
Yeah.
And it's one of those where it's both Joe's attempt to make fun, but also to wound.
Oh yeah, like there's definitely moments where you feel as if like the mother is trying to give her motherly advice, but then like Joe will turn prickly and just be like, you're old, you're going to die soon, you're going to die alone. And the mom's like, I'm just trying to explain to you what is going on with life, like especially when the mother discovers that like this is before Joe meets Joffrey. She like realizes that Joe has a a diamond ring that Jimmy, the black sailor, had given to her, like an engagement ring, um, around her neck, and she's like, "You're gonna make the same mistakes I do, and it takes you half a lifetime to learn from them. Like, you should probably at the least listen to me in this instance. Like, don't hang up yourself with the first man that you meet." And then Joe gets so angry to the point that then the mother turns in a way of like telling her, "Well, what do I expect when like well, it was more like when Joe asked like, hey, who's my dad?" And she goes, well, he's kind of like the village idiot,
like mentally disabled is what she implies.
and it's like it turns back afterwards, which is like it's doubly like even more sadder because it's like Joffrey and her are like at the canal and they're like holding hands, and she's remarking on how like she likes holding hands with her, and she's like, when I would try to hold my mother's hands, she would just wring them away. And then she's like talks about what her mother said about her father, about like, oh, I have the same eyes as my dad, and apparently he was unwell.
Yeah.
Like he was like clinically insane.
Yeah. That he was institutionalized, I
And
think
like
is what happened. Yeah.
Joffrey gets upset because he's like, who told you that? Helen, which is like her mother.
Yeah.
And it's like, of course your mother would say that. She would say anything to wound you. And it's him that explains to her, like, your mother shouldn't have spoken to you like that. Your mother should have just told you nicer. Like, he's kind of like, your mother should have held your hand. Your mother should have made you. It's all the things that he's doing for her, right? He's making her dinner. Like he's making sure that her apartment is clean. He's like livening up their life. And it's like this sad thing that both of them say, like, if they had not met each other, they would have rather not been alive.
Yeah.
And it's like all this love and affection that she basically is looking for in the sailor, she gets from him.
And he's like wants to be there. He's not leaving.
He doesn't want to go.
The I think it was also a film that is a great example of how to use a location.
Yeah.
Like when you're in a city like that, how to get the most out of it. There's some like fantastic shots. You talked about the scene where he comes and finds her. I love that shot because it's I don't know how to describe it exactly, but I think maybe it's like an arch under a bridge.
Yeah.
And there's like a slope down to the river. And just that shot, the way everything is framed and blocked, it was such a great shot for a scene that's just two people talking to each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a great testament to Tony Richardson as a director, because these kitchen sink movies are very talky movies. And that doesn't necessarily imply visually interesting material. So you really have to work to find, and it's a stage play as well. So they're really having to figure out where to do this. It really shows the way his brain was working to go, we have to have a scene where they talk this out, but we also have to make it so that the audience stays visually connected to the movie, and we're giving them interesting images, and images that also correlate to the themes of the scene of what are going on. And I think in every scene they manage to do that. When things need to feel grotesque, they look grotesque.
Yeah.
When things need to feel solemn, you feel the solemnness of the movie. It does feel, though, when we get to the end of the movie, that there is something substantive missing. And I can't necessarily pin down what it is, but the film has this sense that there's like a lack of some connective tissue that pulls it all together.
Yeah.
I read that I won't say particularly what happens at the end, but I will say that in the stage play version, Joe's understanding of what's just happened is a lot more ambiguous, and she's not sure what has happened while she was sleeping. In the movie, to me, it felt like she knew what her mother had done. She didn't say it out loud, but she kind of looks around the apartment. And to me, in the film, I thought, oh, she knows what's happened.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the film had a more ambiguous ending from the way the stage play described it, if that would have made it feel more complete, because it would have given it that kind of aching, bittersweet feeling. Because the ending just kind of feels sad, but it feels like all parties involved are aware. It's just nobody's saying anything out loud.
Yeah.
And I think having Joe lack that bit of information makes the heartbreak more palpable, which is what the movie needed.
Yeah.
Was for us to feel this sadness for Joe, like, oh, she doesn't realize what happened. And it's not going to be until maybe a day later it's too late then. Like, it'll be too late at that point.
Yeah, I think it's also something about the film that I thought I joked around was like the flock of children that are always around outside of where she lives.
But I think
because they're like the same kids that like end up from the apartment that she lived with her mom following to where they're living at.
it's not the same children.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Visually, it's the same actors.
Yeah.
But I think in the film, they're supposed to be different children. But I think that was based on things observed by Sheila Delaney and Tony Richardson of when you go to these poor housing communities. And I mean, I've seen it in America. If you go to like subsidized housing or the projects, as they might call it, the kids are outside all the time because the parents, the mothers especially,
working or don't want their kids.
and the mothers are like, you need to go outside and play because I need to have like, at least an hour of silence kind of a thing. I felt that was such a like realistic detail.
I did love like the fact that the kids always knew where the other one was.
Yeah.
Like he goes looking for Joe, like when she turned out like discovered she was pregnant. Like he was like, oh, I'll go to work. This is like, oh, it's her half day. And he goes to the apartment where they live, and the kids are like, oh, she's over here. Like, like, and like they are, which is like, they're kind of like guard dogs in a fucked up way, right? Like in the film when like Joe's mom leaves, they start following her singing tauntingly,
Yeah.
surrounding the car, like almost like this omen of like something awful is gonna happen, and they're just kind of like, you're an awful person. They never taunt.
They do play roles like spirits or something. Like
Yeah,
they have knowledge beyond all the other
yeah,
characters.
and it's like they don't taunt Joe, they don't taunt Joffrey, they taunt Helen, and they taunt like Peter.
Yeah.
Because it's almost as if like they're going, well, Joffrey and Joe are still children to us.
Well, they can see the truth about these adults.
Yeah.
That they're phonies. We didn't really talk about it. What did you think of Murray Melvin's performance as Jeffrey?
I thought he was really good. I thought, despite the fact that, like, again, one of my complaints is we don't really get to know him besides the fact that he's gay. And
we only know him as Joe's friend.
Yeah.
What did you, I think his shining scene in the film is the obstetrician's office. I think that's the scene where you get to see him act in the way that I like, which is reaction. I think the best actors are the ones who, without dialogue, can still remain in character. Yeah. And you see it through the way like they look at something. And so when he goes to the obstetrician's office and he wants information on what to expect when babies are born, essentially. Yeah. And he's very obviously homosexual. Yeah. Like his affectations, his body language, it's all very feminine and something that people back then, and you can see it because they have these cutaway shots to like the other women in the waiting room when he wants to have information about what to do when the baby's born. And he says it's for my wife. For my wife. This looks of like the raised eyebrows and the kind of like, your wife? What are you talking about? I thought it was a very sensitive performance. And I think I do agree with you in that I wanted to have more of Jeffrey in this movie to really understand him. Yeah, beyond just being like Joe's friend. Because like the moment that we could have known a little bit more about him. He mentioned something about his home. He mentioned that he'd been kicked out of his apartment by his landlady. And she starts asking questions because Joe suspects that he's gay. And she's like, did you bring your girlfriend? Did you bring a man? And I think it was that he brought a man to the apartment and he was found out. And it's like, and apparently he was like saying that he didn't get along with his family because it's just obviously that he's gay. But I love how they never say that explicitly. Yeah, but it's also, we know. Yeah, we know, but it's also like how Joe shows herself to be like a little immature and then apologizes because she starts like she's like, I always wanted to meet someone like you. Can you tell me how it is? Yeah, because she wants him to like tell her in detail what like gay sex is. And he's not interested. That's not the kind of friendship he's trying to cultivate. Yeah, and like how serious he gets and how he refused to answer, which is like that's how it should have been. Like he should have been like you were crossing a barrier. I don't want to be a show for you. Or I'm not an object of amusement for you. Yeah. And like, but then we don't discover more about him besides the fact that like he's made the place that she lives in into a home. Like all he exists for in the script is basically to make life better for Joe. Yeah. But I want to know what would make life better for Jeffrey. And we never really know what his hopes and dreams are, other than he does seem to want to help raise a child. Like he has these parenting instincts in him. Yeah, like he's like asking her to marry him in order for them to raise the child together. Like he's kind of like indicating we don't have to have sex with each other. We can just raise this child together and like we won't be separated then. And it'll make the child quote unquote legitimate in the eyes of like the community. And but then she's like, my child's gonna be half black. Like there's no way I can convince anybody. But he's kind of like, it doesn't matter, we'll have each other kind of thing. And which I'm sure is something that happened a lot in these kind of poor communities when a girl would end up pregnant. If she had a friend who was gay, here's an opportunity for her to have another partner involved in the raising of her child. And then he can kind of hide his homosexuality from people he doesn't want to know about it. Yeah. And which was a very, tragic thing that happened a lot back then, but it was a way that you could survive in these places. Well, like that way you weren't questioned when it came to like your job or getting an apartment. It's like you could be a little bit feminine, but that's okay because you have a wife that could cover for you kind of thing. And but it's a sad story because like I remember at the end you were like, oh, why was the title Taste of Honey? And I was just like,
it had to do with their relationship. It had to do with like having like how it doesn't last.
How, yeah, her friendship with him was a taste of honey. It wasn't, she didn't get to have the honey. She got to have a taste of something sweet,
Yeah.
and then it fades because in the lives of people like this, those joyful moments were not very permanent. They were
Well,
very
yeah, and also
transitory.
like that interesting thing about again the relationship with her and her mother. How she's like, "Yes, I wanted you to come here. Like I wanted you to be here for me." But she's like, "But I want both of you here." And like the mother is a little bit too like used to her ways, and it's like, and it's this sadness also because it's like the only reason she appears is because Joffrey goes to her house to be like, "Hey, your daughter needs you." And they like I do love the fact that they do not get along. I really did appreciate that because he already has a vision of her, so she can't charm him.
Yeah.
And like it's the again like watching it as an adult and like watching like Helen, like like she's probably fucked up with like Joe in like in the past and is repeating the same mistakes because like she's like she did ask Joe like what if I got married again, so you have to wonder how many times
She's been remarried and
has she been
divorced, and yeah.
remarried and how many like, and this time she's actually leaving Joe behind.
Well, I saw someone on Letterboxd say that they had watched this as a young person and they identified with Joe that time. They said, I recently watched it as an adult, and this time they said I really identified with Helen and this desperation to cling to something that stabilizes your life.
Yeah.
And like the way, Helen abandons her own daughter, and like you understand why Helen did it. You don't excuse her for doing
Yeah,
it,
you don't think
but
she's a
you're like,
good
no, I know why
person.
you did it.
But it's acted so well because like the times that the actress that plays Helen, like she looks down, you could see like she's like debating what she's supposed to do next, and she's like, well, I should include my daughter. I haven't given her enough in life, and then just being like, can you just behave? Can you not say these things? Can you just enjoy the moment? Because it's like, yeah, they go to the boardwalk, but she's sulking the whole entire time. Like she doesn't want to participate.
We had mentioned locations. I forgot about this until just now. The cave scene,
Mm.
like in the middle of this movie, she and Joe and Joffrey are going for a walk,
Yeah.
and the kids have tagged along, and they end up, which I guess are actual like caves you can go on a tour of in this area. And so they're like walking through the caves, and you can hear the tour guide talking about the caves and the stalactites and the stalagmites. And I just thought, like, what a just interesting way to take another scene where it's just two people walking and talking and give us something like, oh, I'm not expecting this scene to happen in this place.
Yeah, it's like they were like, I think it was that scene that it was after she told them that she was pregnant, and they're like, "Oh, let's go to the country," and they go for a walk, and they're like the kids again. And I don't know again if the kids are supposed to be like the same, but it's like this interesting thing. Like they eventually will be surrounded by them in one way or another.
Well, it's like there's a lot of unsupervised children, and they were both unsupervised children
Yeah,
who are now transitioning into being adults,
adult.
and they don't really know how to do it.
Yeah.
Would you recommend A Taste of Honey just to a general audience?
I think yes. The more I talked about it, like again, a lot of times we'll watch a movie and I'm kind of like on the verge, but it's not until we start really getting into the conversation about it. This film is pretty good, and I love the fact that there is a viewer that watched it in two like opposite ends of their lives, kind of like understanding Joe and now understanding Helen, because I think those were two really good performances that you end up feeling for both characters and still being like, yeah, you're both fucking it up.
I saw another Letterboxd review and I agreed with it. They said if this movie was made now, you'd have all these annoying people online calling it a woke movie.
Yeah.
But this was made in 1961. And what's tragic is how relevant so much of the things in this film still are, like people living in poverty and not having their basic needs met, interracial relationships being taboo, uh, queer people desperately trying to find ways to survive in a world that is very cruel to them,
Yeah.
and how while we think a lot has changed, and for certain economic groups of people it has, For poor people, it really hasn't. Poor people are still like struggling, especially when they're as intersectional as a lot of these characters. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure to check out our show notes for any relevant links to reviews or other things we might have mentioned, including our website, popcult.blog. Make sure that you subscribe wherever it is you listen to podcasts so that you'll be notified when new episodes are up. If you visit popcult.blog right now, that is a tough word to say. We have just kicked off our February series. All month, we are going to be watching and reviewing movies about movies. So these are mostly narrative films about the film industry or some aspect of the film industry. We've got 2 documentaries we're going to throw in there near the end. We just reviewed All About Eve last week, and upcoming in this next week, we're going to be reviewing Jean-Luc Godard's Contempt, Francois Truffaut's Day for Night, and a movie I had never heard of until this series. It's Federico Fellini's Intervista, one of his later films. Next week on the Pop Cult podcast, we will be doing a pair of movies that are themed. It is George Miller's Movies for Kids. That means we'll be reviewing Babe, Pig in the City, and Happy Feet. And these are both movies that I have never seen and Ariana has never seen either. So it should be interesting, the conversation we have about those. If you enjoy what we do on the podcast and over on the website, we would encourage you to think about supporting us on Patreon. We have lots of different tiers for you to pick from, depending on what you're comfortable spending a month. Even if it's a 1-month donation, we appreciate those as well. I want to thank our current patrons, Becca and Matt, who both donate at the $10 Writers Room level. At that level and above, you get to pick 1 movie a month for us to watch, review. You can even add your own thoughts if you wish. No matter what level you subscribe to our Patreon at, you will get access to patron-exclusive podcasts. We've done about 3 different series so far. We've got a 4th one coming in March. Some of them are Ariana reviewing television shows that she's watched and I haven't. Us looking at movies that Siskel and Ebert gave 2 thumbs down to and seeing what our opinions on them are. And also us doing a little GM-less tabletop role play with some fun systems. You keep listening and we'll keep watching.